for Budgeting 101, learning to live within the blessing God has given you. There's no one better than I can think of than my wife to come and teach this particular subject. And so why don't we make her feel welcome, Stephanie?
God bless you. You may be seated. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a recap from last week. Last week, Pastor Shaw covered the foundation of financial health, and that is your attitude about money and possessions. Last week, we learned that Jesus said it's hard for a rich man to enter into heaven. Wealth is not everything. It is only temporary. Money does not equal happiness. And people who become instantly rich through the lottery and other means are often miserable and lose all that they gain within a few years. So that's not something that we should necessarily strive towards. With all this negativity about riches and wealth, it doesn't make sense for a Christian to spend their life trying to become rich. So if our only goal, our only purpose in life is to become rich, it doesn't make sense for us to strive towards that. And the last point that we learned last week is if we will develop a healthy approach to money by applying biblical principles, we can become healthy emotionally, relationally, and spiritually, because there's nothing I know that can mess people up spiritually like money, because money is something that we can't live without. And so if you're having problems financially, a lot of times that stress will carry over into other areas of your life. And so I believe that what we're going to be talking about tonight, it's a very practical yet really spiritual principle. And so we have a quick video that we're going to watch here.
Oh, I just can't get these numbers to add up.
Like we're never going to get out of this hole.
Credit card debt, does it ever end?
Maybe I can help. We sure could use it.
We've tried debt consolidation companies.
We've even taken out loans to help make payments.
Well, you're not the only ones. Did you know millions of Americans live with debt they cannot control? That's why I developed this unique new program for managing your debt. It's called Don't Buy Stuff You Cannot Afford.
Let me see that. If you don't have any money, you should not buy anything. Sounds interesting.
Sounds confusing.
I don't know, honey. This makes a lot of sense. There's a whole section here on how to buy expensive things using money you save.
Give me that. And where would you get this saved money?
I tell you where and how in Chapter 3.
Okay, but what if I want something but I don't have any money?
You don't buy it.
Well, let's say I don't have enough money to buy something. Should I buy it anyway?
No.
Now I'm really confused.
It's a little confusing at first.
Well, what if you have the money? Can you buy something?
Yes.
Now take the money away. Same story?
Nope. You shouldn't buy stuff when you don't have the money.
I think I got it. I buy something I want and then hope that I can pay for it, right?
No. You make sure you have money, then you buy it.
Oh, then you buy it. But shouldn't you buy it before you have the money?
No.
Why not?
It's in the book. It's only 1 page long. The advice is priceless and the book is free.
Wow, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, we can put it on our credit card.
So get out of debt now. Write for your free copy of Don't Buy Stuff You Cannot Afford. And if you order now, you'll also receive Seriously, If You Don't Have the Money, Don't Buy It, along with a 12-month subscription to Stop Buying Stuff magazine. So order.
Okay. So welcome to everybody who's here, and I'm super excited that you're here today, and I'm also excited that I get to talk to you about this. I've have a history of being the person who always talks about money and budgeting, and it's something that I adopted when we were in youth because I wanted to get the message across to people young that you can live in financial freedom if you start right. And so a lot of you guys are a little bit older, so you're coming from a different perspective in life. But I don't profess to be an expert, but I found a way that works really well for us, and so I want to share it here with you tonight. And some of you may say, I already have a budget, but I find that every time that I read about budgeting or about finances or about money, I learn something, and hopefully tonight, if you already have a good solid budget, that maybe there's still something that you can gain from it, and something that'll help you be better. So there's a few things that I'd like to tell you that I am not. So I am not Dave Ramsey. So if you are a big fan of Dave Ramsey, I am not Dave Ramsey. So if I don't preach all of his principles, I'm sorry. I completely agree. He's got some amazing stuff. I'm not The Wealthy Barber. It's a great book. If you want further resources, I highly recommend it. And I'm not an expert or a know-it-all. I'm still learning myself. So, but my goal today for the session is to give you a very, very practical method of budgeting that will break down your finances to the smallest degree, and it'll make paying for your bills and planning for your future really easy. So there's a scripture that I want to read tonight just to start off, and it's in Proverbs. It's Proverbs 27, and it says, "Be diligent to know the state of your flocks, to attend to your herds, for riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations." So as much as we strive towards riches, it's not something that lasts forever. So it's a temporary goal that we may have. Proverbs 22 verse 7 says, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a servant to the lender." And so that just talks a little bit about debt, and we're just going to touch a little bit on that tonight. So why talk about budgeting? I think I kind of already mentioned it when I first started, but budgeting is a very spiritual discipline. Luke 12:15, and I love this scripture. It says, "He said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of things that he possesses." And so I just want you to take a minute to soak that in, because that means that our lives, the quality of your life does not depend on how much stuff that you have. You can have a lot of stuff and not be happy, and you can have little stuff and be very happy. So I think that is like a good principle. I mean, that scripture just says it all. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of things that he possesses. You can still have a fantastic life. If you don't have all the wealth in the world, you don't have to worry about it, because that's not where happiness lies. So budgeting. Life is more than toys and technology. It's more than furniture and trips and vacations and lattes. It's more than going out to eat. It's more than all those things. Life, so much more exists beyond, the temporary things. Budgeting is an act of self-denial. I just want to say that again. Budgeting is an act of self-denial. It's like, sometimes when I say the word budget, people shudder a little bit inside. They're like, "Oh yeah, I've tried that before. It doesn't work." But it's saying no to yourself and your family because you believe that life is about more than spending money to just obtain things. You believe that what God has given you is all that you need, and that you have enough. You are satisfied, and that you can live within the means that He has given you. Budgeting is learning to live within the parameters of your blessing from God. So I believe one thing about budgeting, and that is that it frees you to reach your financial goals. Many people are afraid of budgeting because they feel like it will either constrict them, or that you may have tried it before and failed. But I just want to challenge that thought, because budgeting is actually just having a plan for your finances that frees you from the fear of not having enough money. So sometimes people live in fear of not having enough money to pay their bills. Well, budgeting can help you with that, because you're going to develop a plan. And it also helps you to develop a plan for your future. So it's more than living month to month, but it's, being able to project out, expenses or things that you may need to save for. So budgeting is a way in which you can methodically save for goals and dreams and make them actually become a reality. So, and I can't speak about this session tonight without telling you that God has been very, very good to us in our lives. We started our financial journey when we got married, and actually even before then, we had done some budgeting. But I would not be doing you a service to tell you that God has blessed us and done absolute miracles in our finances. And those of you that were at Winter Youth, and I know a couple weeks ago, or probably a couple months ago now, Adam had spoken about some of the miracles that God has done in our lives. And so we give all the glory to God, and we're very thankful for all of the miracles that he's done in our lives. But at the same time, I can also tell you that God's blessings in our lives hasn't been without using financial wisdom and restraint. So here's our personal story. I'll just tell you it, and then we'll keep on going. So we got married 10 years ago, and my parents were very good with their finances. But I had to find out a way that worked for me. And so when we first got married, we had very little expenses. We lived in an apartment, and we owned our car. It was really easy. But we had a lot of cash, but at the end of, the month or every 2 weeks, it seemed like that all of our cash was gone. We weren't actually putting anything aside. And so I'm a natural administrator. That's what I do for my career. And Adam was good enough to release me to take care of the finances in our family. And so there are many methods of budgeting. Saving, planning for your future, retirement. I know they're going to get into that some a little bit further down the road, and I'm not going to get into them today because we don't have enough time. There's lots of different theories. And I'm going to focus on the budgeting perspective of it, and then hopefully at the end we may have a few minutes left for questions. So if I could just get a couple people to help me with the handouts. I also have, maybe somebody else can help me. I have some pens here as well. If you need a pen, I have a few pens. Yeah, we'll just walk around and see if people need pens. And just as a side note, if you do get a pen, we would like it back at the end, so just bring it back up. It's part of our budgeting plan. So there are two documents that are being handed out right now. Did you get some notes in there too? Oh, okay. And so the first one looks something like this. This will be the second page that we're going to go to. So the first page that I want to focus on right now, it's at the very top. It says budgeting spreadsheet. It's going to be very practical. So if you have a pen in your purse, grab your pen. We're going to go through a budget. And even for those people who may have a budget right now, it's still good to go through this exercise. I do this on a yearly basis for our own personal finances because I want to know which of my bills have changed, if they've gone up, if they've gone down. I also do a lot of planning for savings and for goals and projects, and those change, every 6 months to a year. So I go through my budget and I reevaluate things. So even if you already have a current budget, just feel free to go ahead and start writing. So on the budgeting spreadsheet right now, at the very top it says monthly income. So if you know the total of your monthly income, write it at the top, and that would be combined salaries if it's for you and your spouse, your household monthly income. Yes, your net income, so what you're actually bringing home. Your gross isn't really a number that you will probably work with too much because there'll be taxes and all kinds of stuff that'll be coming off that, and that's the portion that you don't actually see when you bring it home. So bring home, write down your monthly income, your net monthly income at the very top. And then down below, you can start to fill out your expenses. I put some of my expenses on there that I would have for owning a home. If you rent, it may be a little bit different. And if you're not renting and you're still living with a parent or someone else, then your expenses may be a little bit different. I've left a few lines down below that if you have different expenses, say if you take bus fare, or maybe you might have some medical expenses like prescriptions or different stuff like that. So I've left a few lines that if you know that you have reoccurring expenses, that you can write them in one of the lines down below. So I'm just going to give you guys a few minutes. Just start writing while I'm talking. So I wrote down tithes and missions and offerings. If you want to group them together, that's fine, but I keep them separate, and that way I know what I'm doing for my giving. Then I put down my mortgage. For some of you, that may be rent. So you can just put that beside there. Then if you have a car payment, you can put the number there. The approximate gas that you would use for your vehicle per month. So I average it out in a monthly basis so I can know approximately with regular use for my vehicle what my expenses would be for the month. Also, my insurance for my car, I do it on a monthly basis. I don't pay annually. It's just easier for me to do it on a monthly basis. So I pay for my insurance in a car every month. So just write down your average monthly. My home insurance is something that doesn't change. It's the same on a monthly basis as well. My gas, I'm on equalized gas payments, and so they're fairly consistent too. And then electricity and water, that changes a little bit in the summer months. I'm not on equalized for that. And then groceries, I just do an approximate of what I would spend on a monthly basis for my groceries. And I usually include meat and all that kind of stuff in there as well. My city taxes, that's my choice. I pay for them on a quarterly basis, but I break it out across the year, and I know exactly what I'm paying on a monthly basis for my city taxes. I have on their allowance. That is something that Adam and I have, he's talked about it many times, and he jokes about it quite often, but that's something that Adam and I have adopted into our lives, and it's a controlled way to have spending money for small things. For example, if you're at work and you want to buy your lunch, or you forgot your breakfast, or you want to buy a coffee, then we have a dollar value that we assign for an allowance, and that helps us control something that may be considered a latte fund, a latte factor. And your latte factor is what you would spend on coffees or small incidentals. So that number is static, or it's the same for me, because we just have a certain amount of allowance that we have each month. Then the cell phone bill, it's fairly consistent. Home phone and internet. Variable expenses, that would be like deodorant, clothes. If you have children, you might need to write down school expenses, that kind of stuff. And then on there I have a savings goal. I try to assign money to savings. And then at the very bottom, you'll see something that says goals. And once you're finished filling out the portion of your monthly bills, you can total up that number. And if you have a phone, it might be a little bit easier, or some of you might be really good at math in your head. It's not me. So just add up your total expenses. And so last time I was doing this seminar, it was for the hyphen group at a hyphen camp, and somebody put up their hand. They're like, help, my expenses are more than my income. What do I do? But I said, that is the best thing to know, because even if it's not the numbers that you want to see, you need to know if your expenses are more than your income, because that is the first part about getting out of debt, is to know what your income is, what your expenses are, and then making a plan. So something that I do on an annual basis, I already talked about it, but I review our expenses that aren't fixed. So I review our cell phone plan, and if we're coming to the end of our contract, I look at it and say, how can we squeeze that? I also look at my internet plan and see how I can squeeze that. Things like, insurance. Can I search around for a different insurance company? I'm going to be searching around to the one that Pastor Shaw was talking about because mine's coming up in about a month. And so I'll shop around and see if I can lower any of my expenses. I do that on about a annual basis, and that helps me keep in control of inflation and things that may be changing in my budget without me realizing it. And it also helps me to be financially responsible, and the fact that I'm not just signing up to a plan and then, you know, sometimes you get a great plan that starts off, say for my internet at home, it's $50 a month, but after a year they bump it up to like $90. Well, when that year comes around, I'm going to be shopping around for a different plan because that'll impact my budget. So down at the very bottom, I want to talk about that part there, and it says goals. And so this is something that we've done. Adam and I actually have a kind of our own personal capital plan. And so we sat down not too long ago and we said, what are some of the things that we would like to do for our home, or some of the major expenses we know we're going to have coming up? We just bought a vehicle, so that was a goal that we were saving for. So write down items. Say, for example, you want to go on a trip, or you know, there's something major that's coming up. You may need to replace the roof of your home, or, you know, any of those kind of things that you can write down the item below, the approximate amount that you think that it will cost you. Time is the amount of months until that's due. So for example, I know that there's something that I'm going to be doing in September, and so if I can figure out how much money I need for that item, then I know that in between now and September I have, what, 6 months, 5 months, I haven't done the math. But I know that I have so many months to save for that goal. So if I divide it up into a monthly basis, it becomes a much more achievable goal than coming to September and looking around for, you know, $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever amount of money that I need. So this is something that I do for our finances, is that I break down my goals into the amount of time and the amount of months. And some of my goals may not start right away. Like Adam and I, we looked the other day and we thought, okay, this goal we're going to, you know, we'd like to do it in maybe 3 years. So that's not something that we're going to be too concerned about saving for right now. What are the things that we need to save for this year? And so it kind of just gives us a better picture. So that's something that's really useful, especially if you want to plan for, you know, say you need a new computer, or you want to go on a trip, or, you know, that kind of stuff. So take the number that you have from the goal portion and add it back into your budget spreadsheet up at the top. You'll see it's the last line there under savings. It says goals. So you can break down your goals into a monthly basis, and that'll help you achieve some of those big goals. A very common term that people use this day is your bucket list. And so maybe you have a few things that you want to do in a certain amount of time. So that's a good way to plan for it. Is everybody finished that portion? Just raise your hand if you're finished that portion. I don't want to move along if there's too many people that are still filling out that part. I'll just wait 1 or 2 more minutes. I'll give you a minute or two to finish your budget spreadsheet, and then we're going to move on to the next sheet. So the next sheet looks something like this. This sheet right there, if you can all see that. So something that a lot of people have done is created a budget. And a budget is a really great, useful tool, only if you actually apply it to the amount of money that you make. So this is the part where we're going to take it a little bit further than just actually creating a budget for yourself. But that is, it becomes all of a sudden very practical in that if you take a look at the sheet, it says April, pay 1, pay 2, pay 3, and pay 4. So that depends if you're paid on a weekly basis or if you're paid on a bi-weekly basis. What I do is that you'll see at the top I wrote down an example. So I said April, pay 1, $800. Say that is your net for that week of the first week of April. So then you'll see down in the column beside it, I wrote down mortgage $500, car insurance $150, cell phone bill $100, and grocery $50. So what I'm doing is taking your items from your budgeting spreadsheet and actually assigning them to one of your pays. So that way, when that money comes into your account, you know exactly where all of that money from your pay is going to. So there's no question in your mind. When I get paid on a biweekly basis, it takes me 3 seconds to pay all of my bill, because I look at the sheet right here and I say, okay, out of my $800 pay, I've got $500 that is for my mortgage, $150 set aside for my car insurance, $100 for my cell phone bill, and I've got $50 for groceries. So what you can do now is maybe just go through the first month of April and write down. So go back to your budget spreadsheet and actually write down your expenses in a pay period. So this is the part that makes it really, really practical. When you get paid, there should be no question in your mind where I budget 99.9% of my money every 2 weeks. I know where, right down to within $20 everywhere, every bit of where that paycheck is going. So it makes it really easy, because that way, when you get paid, you know exactly what you're doing with every bit of that money, and it really helps you so that there's never any question at the end of the month that you know which bills need to be paid and which bills have already been paid, because you have a plan for every single week that you get paid. So I'll just give you a few minutes to go through, just do 1 month. And for me, my months repeat each other. So it's really easy, because I know, for example, that every 2 weeks I have a mortgage payment. So every 2 weeks I have a set number that is going towards my mortgage. Every 2 weeks, I break down my city taxes. Every 2 weeks, I have a set amount of money that's going towards my city taxes. So this is something that makes it so easy for you. You're going to be able to put your budget into action without even blinking an eye, because automatically you know where your money is going. So I'll just give you a few minutes to fill out and try to assign all of your expenses and your goals and your savings to one of your paychecks. Something that I use, a tool that I use, so that each week I'm not having to micromanage a lot of my finances, is that I put some of my expenses on my credit card, and that's up to you about how you feel about your credit card, but it helps me in that I know that all my expenses can only add up to a certain amount for that month, and it allows me to have some flexibility to say, for example, if there's a sale on meat, I might buy $100 worth of meat, which it kind of overflows my budget a little bit, but it gives me a little bit of flexibility and flow. So that's a tool that I use. You may have your own personal feeling about credit cards, and so that's up to you. If you some people use an envelope method, where each week they have so much set aside in different envelopes, and then they draw from that pool to pay their bills, say for the smaller things like your groceries or your eating out allowance or your variable expenses, deodorant, clothes, shoes, that kind of thing. So whatever method works best for you, that's the method that works best for me. And so I'll just give you a couple more minutes to go through and assign all of your expenses from your budget to a pay. And then I've got a few budgeting tips for you. The first thing that, and this is kind of a no-brainer for the most part, but it is, if you can all avoid it, stay out of debt. Don't buy stuff that you can't afford. I find that people get very wrapped up in having stuff, and that we overextend ourselves, because sometimes we translate our wants into our needs. And so it's hard because sometimes you really, really, really want something, but when you actually are very honest with yourself, you don't need it. And so something like rent to owns, they're a bad idea. Just because the amount that you actually pay in the end far exceeds the value of the item that you've purchased. Another thing is cut your latte factor. And so that is, that's the little spending, the things where you may drop $5 on or $10 on, when you're just kind of spending and it's not in a part of your budget. So that's something that you can easily cut to help you control your spending. And also it could be the thing that's actually sending you into debt or not achieving your goals, because at the end of the month you'll always pay your bills, but the thing that may suffer is your savings or your goals or that kind of stuff. So evaluate. That's why we use the allowance, is because it helps us stick to a budget, and that way the latte factors isn't the thing that's stopping me from achieving my goals. Another thing is that if you're able to, if you don't have one already, is that I recommend having a rainy day fund, and that is finances that are set aside in your bank, savings, that will be there in the event that you ever lose your job or become ill or have unforeseen circumstances. And the recommended amount that many different books and authors and people who are experts on it is they say having at least 3 months worth of your actual bills in a savings account. And so the thing that I recommend for that is finding a savings account where you don't have immediate access to it, meaning that you can't go to the bank and use your debit card for that money that's in that account. Have an account that takes you at least 24 hours to get your cash out, and that way it's never something that you're going to do impulsively to get money out of that savings account. You actually have to think about it, and then it'll come the next day. So whatever number you're comfortable with, but having some sort of savings that you don't touch on a regular basis, just set aside. And the other thing that we've already talked about quite a bit tonight is that making a plan. Being successful in budgeting includes planning ahead. Failing to plan is a plan to fail. I'm sure you've heard it many times. I map everything out, as you can see, and I use this religiously. This is what I actually do on a weekly basis. I use this religiously. And so right now, for our personal family, I'm prepared to the end of July. I know where my bills are and where my expenses are and my savings. And so it gives me a sense of confidence in that as long as nothing major changes, but I have a rainy day fund for that anyway, that I know that my bills will be paid because I have a plan for them. Another tip that I have is, and we talked about it a little bit already, is practicing delayed gratification. And this is learning how to say no, not just to yourself, but to your family or your children as well. Sometimes we're too quick to, just because you have the money and maybe you can afford something, to just going out and buying it. Try practicing a little bit of delayed gratification, especially for your families. Teaching your kids to save is a good practice for them. You're not punishing them. It's actually you're equipping them for their future. So learn how to say no to yourself and also to your family, so that if they want something, maybe you'll help them to save for that goal as well. Scale back unnecessary expenditures or look for better deals. So that's what I talked about before, is that on a yearly basis, I go through our finances and try to see what expenditures we can cut back on, or look for better deals on insurance, that kind of stuff. Another thing is knowing your key financial triggers. And so, for example, it's commonly known as shopping therapy or retail therapy. So sometimes it could be one of your triggers that if you're feeling bad about yourself, or you're unhappy, or you want something just to cheer you up, or maybe you go to the mall to relax or have fun or shopping. Some guys are like, never, that's not a fun place. But other people find it a lot of fun. And so know your triggers. Do you try to buy things when you feel bad about maybe not doing something for your kids? And so maybe you haven't been home a lot, but instead you bring them home a giant gift. Well, that's a trigger for you because you're using your money or your finances to make yourself feel better. So, and then another thing is that you buy things. Another trigger could be is that you buy things just because they're on sale. So maybe you don't need it, or maybe it's not actually what you need, but you just love sales so much that you'll buy it just because it's a cheap, good deal. So evaluating whether or not you really need it and not buying it just because it's on sale. Another thing is that don't be afraid, and I said this earlier, but don't be afraid to give your spouse control of your finances. If this is an area where they excel. So if you're the person who always spends, then it's probably a good idea to let your spouse have control of the finances. Yeah, Adam. And another thing is that you don't keep secrets with your spouse in regards to your finances. So Adam doesn't, currently right now, doesn't know what's in our savings account because he trusts me with it. But routinely, I'll sit down with him. I'll be like, Adam, this is how much is in this account. This is how much is in that account. This is where I spent the money. He's like, Steph, you don't have to tell me what you spent money on. I said, no, because I'm accountable to you, just like you're accountable to me. So just because I control the finances doesn't mean that I get say in everything that we purchase. We're accountable to each other. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that if you live on your own, you have to become an expert. So you don't have anybody to rely on to do your finances for you. So if you're living on your own, your excuse cannot be, I'm bad at this. You need to discipline yourself to learn it and to become good at it, because you don't have anybody else to rely on to do it for you. So learn how to become the expert in it. So we'll just touch a little bit on debt. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lenders. So how to get out of debt. The first thing is that you may need to consolidate your debt to get a lower interest rate. So if you have multiple small debts or even larger debts in different areas, one thing that you may want to consider is consolidating all your debts into the lowest interest rate that you can find. And sometimes that's going to a bank and sourcing out that interest rate so that you're paying the least amount of interest possible on the debt that you do have. If your debts are all at the same interest rate, then what I recommend is that you start by paying off your smallest debts first, because this gives you a sense of accomplishment. And then once you've paid off your small debts, you take that money and start paying off your larger debts, because it'll kind of have a snowball effect and give you a sense of accomplishment and that you're actually going somewhere with your finances. Now, some people may say, I have debt, but there's two different kinds of debts, and the first is good debt. A good debt is considered something that is an asset or is accomplishing a purpose or a goal. Some examples of good debt are your home. That would be considered an investment. Education is considered a good debt because it's investing in your future. Sometimes you need to invest in education in order to actually be able to financially sustain yourself. So that's considered a debt that is a good debt. Investing, if you have the finances to do it, if you have to get into debt sometimes, but it is an investment debt, as long as it's not a high-risk one, then that can be good debt. And also buying a car can be a good debt because you need that vehicle to get to work, but I'll qualify that statement by saying buying a car that you can afford. So if you see me driving a BMW, which that is like my dream vehicle, I can't help it, I love it. But for me, that would be bad debt because I can't afford it. So if you ever see me driving a BMW, you know I had a bad day or something, I don't know. Bad debt is things like consumer credit card debt or any credit card debt. Having a car that you cannot afford because vehicles are declining assets. They're overall not a wise investment to make, although they do serve a purpose. Things like payday loans are bad debts. Lines of credits can be bad debts, but it depends on the purpose of your line of credit. And also borrowing money to pay bills, that is bad debt. So here's the reason why we don't want to have bad debt. And there's a slide up there. That is it right there. So I'll just give you an example of if you're only making the minimum payment on your debt. The interest rate that I used was one that was from a credit card company. So if you go online, lots of banks and places, they're now required to have these kind of calculators, or a lot of times you'll see if you have a credit card, you'll see on your statement, if you make your minimum payment, how many years it will be to pay off your debt. And so, for example, if you have $2,000 sitting on your credit card, if you're making the minimum payment, it will take you 15.16 years to pay off. And over that period of time, you will have paid $2,423.22 of interest. So you've over doubled the initial investment that you made just by paying interest. So that $2,000 really great deal all of a sudden turned into $4,423.22. Not probably such a great deal anymore. So, and then you can see the numbers as well for $5,000, and then if you have larger debt like $20,000, the amount of interest that you would pay over 34 years if you're just making the minimum payment on your credit. So that's why having consumer debt is not a good thing, is because you can see just the numbers speak for themselves. And so if you can avoid it, that is probably the best choice that you could make. Also, something else that will affect your finances and your ability to get loans, get a vehicle, get a mortgage, anything like that, is something that is called your credit rating. And so your debt and also your budgeting really, in essence, affects your credit rating. Because if you're paying your bills late, or only making minimum credits on your credit card and carrying a debt from one month to the next, it will affect your credit rating. I don't know if you have a slide for that as well, Charlie. If you don't, that's fine. But your credit rating boils down to the fact that say if we had 3 people that went for the same loan on the same house, if you have a good credit rating, you will pay the least amount of interest for that home. But if you have a medium credit rating, then you'll pay more than the person who has a good credit rating for that exact same home. And if you have a bad credit rating, you will be paying the most possible for that exact same home that the other 2 people are paying much less for. So I don't have the slide to show you the amount of interest, but it's equivalent to the amount of interest that you would pay on something like a credit card debt, and that is that it just about doubles the amount that you would pay for the investment on the home if you have bad credit. So often, sometimes when you'll drive by car dealerships, they'll say 0% financing. Most of the time it says unapproved credit check. You'd only get the 0% if you have like the best credit rating. But everybody else, if you don't have a good credit rating, then you won't get the 0%. You may be paying 2, you may be paying 4, 6, 8, 10% for that exact same vehicle that somebody else is driving. So that's the reason why we teach these principles, is that if you're not paying your bills on time, if you're only making minimum payment, or if you're carrying debt, it all boils down to it affects your credit score, which in turn affects how you're even getting approved for things like your hydro. You have to have a good credit rating, or your gas, or if you want to buy a cell phone, all that kind of stuff. It's all related to your credit score. So I have just over 10 minutes left, and so I don't profess to be an expert, but if you do have any questions, I will try my best to answer them. Jeanette? I love the 3 pay months. I don't know if you guys heard what Jeanette said. She said, what do you do on the months when you have the extra pay in the month? I assign that to one of my goals. And I take all of that money. I do not, when I have an extra pay in a month, I do not let it get absorbed into my budget. So what that means is that I'm not just expanding my budget. So this month, instead of spending, $2,000, I can all of a sudden spend $2,500. I automatically, as soon as I notice it coming up in my pays, I add it to the list. And so I'll say, I know this year, June is a 5 pay for me, you too. And I know in June that I have an extra pay, and so I automatically assign that to one of my goals or into my savings account, whichever I need to do at that time. So that's what I recommend. And that's the same thing. We didn't have a car payment for 4 years, just about 5 years. And for that entire 5 years, I never once let that money that we used to pay down our car get absorbed into my budget. I always assign that to either savings or goals or that kind of stuff, because I knew as soon as I absorbed it into that budget, that when I wanted to buy a car again, I would have a really hard time squeezing down my budget that amount of money. So that's another thing that you can do, a tip to help you, that if all of a sudden you have more money, for example, when you get an increase from work, don't just expand your budget. Instead, take that amount of money that your paycheck has increased and assign it to savings or to one of your goals, something like that. So don't just allow your budget to increase just because you have more money. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah. So his question is what can you use to check your credit score? And there's websites that you can go to if you just Google it. I think one is called Equifax is one of them in Canada that you can use. There's 2 reputable ones. Anything else, I'd be really leery of putting in your SIN number, and everything else is the internet. You got to be careful. And so there's 2 of them that are reputable sites in Canada that you can use. I think that you may have to pay. One of them is free, I believe, but I haven't checked it out myself. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's an app or anything like that in Canada. I haven't looked into it yet, but if we do find out, then maybe I'll tell Pastor Shaw or Adam, whoever is speaking next week, if we find out that there is a resource that's free where you can check your credit score, and that way you know. Something else that I wanted to add about credit score is that you should not be afraid of your credit score. You have a credit score no matter what. So the answer to getting a better credit score is not canceling all of your credit cards. I know it seems like that would be the thing to do if you wanted to increase your credit score, but it's not. What the companies want to see is that you're carrying a 0 balance on your card. So even if you have a card and you don't use it and it carries a 0 balance, that shows them that you're responsible with your credit card. If you're going for, this is something I found out when we were going for a mortgage for our home, I was going to cancel some of my credit cards, and a financial advisor told me not to cancel my credit cards because I've been approved for them, and what it does is it increases my credit score a little bit. And so if you have credit cards that you're not using, if you're going for a large loan, don't necessarily cancel them. Wait until after you've gone for keep them at a 0 balance, but don't necessarily cancel them until after you've gone for your loan, because those 0 balance credit cards can actually help your credit score. Go ahead. The question is that property taxes, is it a good idea to pay it through your mortgage? It's a really easy way of doing it that you don't have to think about it. The reason I didn't do it personally is because the way it worked out is that when I bought my house the previous owner had paid the taxes until the end of the year, and my bank wanted me to start paying my taxes right away. And for me, I was like, well, what are you doing with all my money if I've already paid my taxes to the end of the year? So I just didn't feel comfortable with it, so I chose to pay them myself. Some people, no, there's not, because the bank is more interested in you paying your taxes because they don't want you to lapse on your taxes and then them have to repo your house. So for them, they're more interested in you paying your taxes than charging you a fee for that. Anna? So when we first got married, a funny story is that I'll have to throw you under the bus, Adam, a little bit, I'm sorry. But what happened is that he worked in a plaza where there was a CIBC bank, and so anytime he needed money for lunch or a snack or whatever, he'd just go to the bank machine and take out 20 bucks. And he'd come home with like pockets full of money, and I'd be like, where's all this money coming from? But every other day he was going to the bank and pulling out 20 bucks. And so that helped us realize that like a lot of money was going to like small expenses, and we just weren't tracking like where some of the money was going to because we didn't actually know, because sometimes it's really easy just to spend cash if you have it in your pocket. And so what we did is that, and we started it back 10 years ago and we haven't increased it, but it's not happening, so I'm sorry. But on a very practical weekly basis is that we each take out $20 cash, and that's the very practical part that he was talking about, is that we each take $20, and it's not a lot, but it helps us keep that number low, because over the month, it's $80. That's not assigned to any bill. It's just coffees and small change. So really over the month, it actually does add up. But on a weekly basis, we each take $20, and that's called our allowance, very fondly our allowance. And that helps us maintain a low amount of money that we spend on the latte factor. And that way it's very planned, because, for example, when we weren't using it, I added up like how much money we spent at Tim Hortons getting breakfast sandwiches in the morning, and in a matter of like 2 weeks, we'd spent like close to $60 on like breakfast. And I'm like, breakfast? It wasn't even that good. Like, you know what I mean? So stuff like that can really add up quickly, because 2 breakfast sandwiges, 10, 14 bucks, and you do it 3-4 times in a matter of, you don't think you're doing it often, but if you're using the cash and you only have $20, all of a sudden it'll help you evaluate if you really want 3 coffees in a day, or if you want to save your money for a nice lunch or something else that you want, a book or magazine or whatever. Probably time for one more question, and then Mary. So if your income varies, it's a little bit harder to do your planning, but it makes your planning that much more essential, because then you may not know where some of your income is coming from, right, if it's varying a little bit. So what it may mean is that you can't do some of your extra planning. So I would still plan for your fixed expenses. So things like, you need to have a plan always for your mortgage, your car payment, your utilities, that kind of stuff. And then your extra income, whether it's down or up, you may have to adjust some of your other expenses that aren't fixed. For example, things like your allowance, your eating out, your variable expenses like deodorant and clothing and that kind of stuff. Those are the ones that you'll be able to fluctuate a little bit more in between. Okay. God bless you all. I hope that you guys gained something from it. And If you have any questions, the other thing I always tell the young people is that if you're currently not living out on your own, I will give you a copy of my budget outside of the fact that I won't tell you how much I make or how much I give, but I'll tell you all of the other expenses as far as what I pay for my utilities, my car insurance, all that kind of stuff. If you're moving out on your own or currently don't own a home and you're not sure what some of those expenses may look like, I'm more than willing to give you those expenses to help you prepare for that circumstance. God bless you.
Oh, you still had 7 minutes left. Well, that was awesome, and we hope you got lots out of that. That's the first time I've actually done one of these. It was a great, the pens. And we all have I have a system. It's not quite as complex as that, but I think this is a great way to look at your finances and figure out a way to make your life better. There's nothing worse than having a lot of financial pressure. We've all had them, but you don't want to be living there all the time. And so we heard some great things tonight, and hopefully that was a blessing to you. I'm sure Stephanie wouldn't mind you coming and maybe asking her some questions privately about different things. I don't know if, I think you mentioned you were good about that in the past, and you may not want to ask something publicly in front of everyone, but I know that she's very good in this area, and the Lord has blessed them. Praise God.